Our culture wants us to be shining all the time and to get an A plus and a gold star. And life doesn't always go that way. But when we can really sit with failure and find meaning in it, we can transform our lives in beautiful ways.
If I share my story out there, if I put my vulnerability out there, if I put my failure out there, someone can relate to it and they can bounce back in their lives.
Even when we feel like we're sort of drowning in darkness or in the bottom of the well, that we kind of plant these seeds for what's coming next. We live in a culture that gives us just really unkind expectations and really wants us to be so perfect all the time, right? That they want us to be like youthful and healthful and vibrant at all times. And the reality is that we're just not. When we can kind of just sit with ourselves and, quiet some of that, new paths show up that weren't there before.
Life flows like an endless ocean of stories. We often miss these precious tales as we rush through our days, too consumed by daily struggles to notice the poetry swirling around us. Yet within these stories lie the keys to our past, sparks for our creativity, and fresh winds to fill our sails. I am Obro, a writer based in Melbourne, in quest of those stories with diverse voices that tell them from every corner of the world. Welcome to Stories and Stanza.
Hi, Rhonda, and welcome to Stories and Stanza. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. How are you?
I
Thank you
am
for
good.
having me.
I'm good, thanks. It's my morning and looks a little bit cloudy and gloomy. It is supposed to be our spring, but instead of warming up, Melbourne has this pattern of weather fluctuations. It can change very rapidly. I'm just starting my day, and this is how I usually work with overseas guests who are not in the same time zone. So, for our listeners, could you please introduce yourself and briefly tell us about what are we going to explore in this episode?
Absolutely. So my name is Rhonda Lynn, and I'm an author and an entrepreneur. My business focuses on amplifying the world-changing voices of spiritual and holistic wellness businesses. I see my business as something that's world-changing and helping people that are changing the world. And then I have a Substack community called Earth and Jar Stars, which is really dedicated to seeing our lives through a gentler lens through nature.
That is amazing. And as the title of my podcast, Stories and Stanza, I can probably guess that it has something to do with writing and stories. And the two motivations behind my podcast, one was to amplify the voice of writers, so that they can share their work and it can reach a wider audience. So that's how I chose the name Stories and Stanza. And I'm delighted to have you here, and I'm looking forward to hearing all your ideas. And I call this particular section or say series in the podcast, I call that Fail With Me. And we have published a number of episodes on this theme, but just for the listeners who have joined us for the first time, I just wanted to say that it is not about failure or negativity. It is more about looking into failure and what the stories of failure are telling us, instead of accepting that as some kind of stigma, some kind of challenge or a barrier. Be transparent and open about it, understand our failures, and then build our true resilience and healing from there. So that's the theme for Fail With Me. So, Rhonda, the first thing I want to hear from you is, how does that idea sit with you? What do you feel about it?
Well, first of all, I just will say that I have loved listening to your podcast and found it such a nourishing experience. And I'm grateful for you to have me as a guest on the show. And I think it's really true that our culture wants us to be shining all the time and to get an A plus and a gold star. And life doesn't always go that way. But when we can really sit with failure and find meaning in it, we can transform our lives in beautiful ways. And so that was one of the things that I'd love to chat with you about and hear your thoughts about as well.
Absolutely. And in my life, I have seen many failures. And at some stage, I was overwhelmed by it. So I felt that I'm not becoming a good father, I'm not becoming a good husband, maybe not a good son, or I'm not doing well in my job. And everything was emotionally was weighing in on my shoulders, and that wasn't good. And I had some life changing experiences to come out of this darkness or the anger and frustration. And when I did that, I felt that this is something not to be ashamed of. Now, why I chose the title Fail With Me is because when I was going through that dark phase, I came across books and articles that just says you have to succeed, and you're doing this wrong and you have to do this to get it right. And I felt that I couldn't connect with that narrative. It didn't sit with me very well. I felt that it was very criticizing, and someone who is a motivational speaker should be a little bit more empathizing and understand what I'm going through instead of selling something, a concept out there. I found that very preachy. And I thought that uh, if I open up about it, and the reason to open up about it is, what if someone is in the same situation as me? And if I share my story out there, if I put my vulnerability out there, if I put my failure out there, someone can relate to it and they can bounce back in their lives. And that is why I chose the title Failed With Me. And I feel that I'm not ashamed to admit that I failed in some places, but then uh, I took time to understand what it was, and I was able to turn everything around. So that is the sort of motivation behind the Fail With Me series. So, can you tell us about your story where you think that you encountered failure, but you came back stronger on the other side?
Absolutely. And I think that most of us have these stories, and that you're right, that we kind of like keep them to ourselves and we think that we're alone in that, and that by opening up about them, it helps other people to connect as well. And I think that my own story with failure might be a little bit different, perhaps, because in some ways I was very successful outwardly. And I don't want to speak like negatively at all about my old job, because I loved my students. I used to be in education, and I loved my colleagues, and I'm still like great friends with lots of them. And they've been huge supporters of my work since I've started my business as well. But the reality is that I had felt called for a long time to write, and I wasn't doing that like to the extent that I really wanted to in my past job. And so there was this deep unrest that, I was doing a great job at my work, and I was making an impact on students and winning awards and doing things right. But then I just felt a lot of despair because I wasn't doing what my heart called me to do. And so it was almost like a disconnect between how outwardly everything looked and how I felt on the inside. And there's just a tremendous pressure to follow a certain path, right? You get a good job, and you have your retirement plan, and you like have health insurance through your job, and you like do these things. But I really felt called to do something different. And so I started a business, not really kind of knowing where the path would lead, but just like following these breadcrumbs that I knew that I was supposed to write. And I knew that like I had so much light in me that I wanted to share with others, that I left what was like a very secure and wonderful job to embark in entrepreneurship. That was 4 years ago. And doing that has helped me just to like step into my heart's calling and to do things that I never, could have imagined in some ways. But it was being able to like sit with that darkness and that discomfort of the disconnect between what I felt called to do and really how I was sort of spending my time.
And do you want to tell us about the book that happened in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will tell you, like, with confidence that this is not something I could have done, 4 years ago or even 1 year ago, because I felt so blocked. Like, I knew that I wanted to write, but I was blocked that I just couldn't do it. I think I just didn't have the gas from putting all of my energy into this career that was sort of in a different direction than I was being called to do. And so I sort of started writing a little bit for my business. I started a beautiful Facebook community and sort of started sharing a little bit more of my words there. In time, I started a Substack community and started sharing a little bit more of my words there. And then my dear friend died, and she was a beautiful poet. And as she was dying, she published a gorgeous collection of poems. And when she did that and then she died, it just inspired me. Like, don't wait that long, Rhonda. Like, you have to do this now. And so in the last year, I've written and found a publisher and published this book of poems. It's called The Chapel of Small Breath. It's dedicated to my friend who just really encouraged me to like hit the gas on my dreams and move in the direction that I felt called to, but that really I had been afraid to do for decades.
That is amazing and heartfelt, that how you found your motivation and then you took the step to follow what you wanted to follow. And when I speak to a fellow writer, I ask them always that can they read something they have written. So it can be something from your book, it can be something just you want to share with the audience. Would you like to read something you have written?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think that this book fits right into the theme of Fail With Me, because the book is written in 3 parts. It's about a relationship ending. So the first part's sort of about the relationship, and the second part is it dissolves, and then the third part is sort of this renewal that we plant seeds for, even when we feel like we're sort of drowning in darkness or in the bottom of the well, that we kind of plant these seeds for what's coming next. And
Very
so,
true.
it fits right into the arc of your episode. This is a poem called Listing What's Left. There is a pencil-sized hole in the towel your grandmother gave you 10 years ago. Salt thrown over your shoulder. Tiny swallow's nest unraveled by wind, and a rock worn smooth with worry in your coat pocket. There is your hand hopelessly fingering the fray, a lonely light, and St. Jude holding a mason jar full of everything you ever lost. The edge of a spoon your grandfather stirred his oatmeal with every day for 80 years. Its metal curve worn down into a smooth, flat line, like an arrow that stretches straight to the heart of second chances.
That is amazing, truly beautiful, and such uh, heartfelt imagery is there. And I like when there are images in the words, and then everyone in, like the reader, in their mind, they can build their world to relate to the poem. Thank you for sharing that. uh, in context of uh, what you do now, you mentioned about your community and connecting with nature and helping people. Can you share some of those ideas, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we live in a culture that gives us just really unkind expectations and really wants us to be so perfect all the time, right? That they want us to be like youthful and healthful and vibrant at all times. And the reality is that we're just not. And so for me, looking at nature has been a generous lens to be able to look at the happy times of my life, but also the times that have been miserable and just full of grief and sadness through the lens of nature. And it's like you look at a tree, at least here, right? The trees will oftentimes drop their leaves in the fall and they don't appear to be doing anything, but that's a time of deep nourishment for their roots where they're getting stronger because of that. Or like an apple tree, for example, it needs a certain amount of cold days to be able to bear fruit. And so for me, looking at my own life through that lens, rather than through the lens of always being super productive and, super A plus, has just helped me to be a lot gentler with myself through the low times and the times where I felt like I was failing or just wasn't on top of the world. And so that's really the message that I try to convey to my community, is like, how can we look at nature to be a beautiful lens so that we can be gentler with ourselves? Because when we can kind of get rid of all of the shoulds and, the mental chatter of beating ourselves up, we can actually lean into those dark times in ways that help us transform.
Thank you. And I personally feel very drawn to nature when I'm writing. And in my second book, I wrote a poem called Language of Water, and that was to reflect that, lotus leaves are waxy, and then there are droplets. If they fall on them, they never stay still, they're just moving very fast. And that I feel is a nature's reflection of our mind, that our mind is always moving and fluctuating and just is not able to stay still. But if we can like meditate and be mindful, then we can possibly harness that unsettling nature of mind and be more grounded and rooted. So, can you share your experience with nature? What is it that you tell people? How do you think that, makes a difference?
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind, even I love the title of your poem, by the way, the sounds in that are gorgeous. But even with something like a lotus flower, right? Like lotus flowers come up from the muck, right? From the
Yes,
mud, and then they bloom into something really beautiful. And so, I look at anything in nature like that, when we can really sit with those dark times and lean into them and be able to see what are the little breadcrumbs, the little shimmers that I'm finding there, that we can bloom into something really unexpected and really beautiful. And it's just something that's like been a theme in my life over and over again,
that
that
is that is so true.
sitting with the darkness, yeah, can help transform us. I mean, I don't know. So one of the things I do in my Substack community is we have what are called seasonal seeds. And it's kind of an intentional time to focus on a certain topic or a theme. And so we're starting with the first one this November, and it's all about that. How do we sit with darkness and the icky and the uncomfortable and just wanting to dissociate or wanting to distract ourselves from that? But how can we be mindful with it in ways that allow doorways to show up where there were only walls and allow us to sort of become transformed?
I'll share something from my personal life. When I was going through this difficult phase of my life, I felt a lot of things got tangled with one another. So, health and mental wellness, and this darkness and self esteem or self worth, these things kind of got tangled. And whatever I was doing was keeping that tangled and then coping up with it. But when I realized that this is how these things are tangled, and then I felt that, okay, now I understand what I need to do for healing. And while healing might look very different to everyone, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this. Like at some stage when we are going through this darkness, we might feel stuck, might feel that, we are compensating for that darkness with something. It works very differently for different people. So I'm not just don't want to give examples, but I'm more curious to hear your thoughts that what happens when you see someone is stuck in that darkness, and how do you help the person to towards a healing journey? You talked about nature, but I'm just more curious to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that for me, in my own life at least, looking for those little things that, are joyful or, that made me curious And sometimes it wasn't necessarily like a big thing at all, right? It might be like taking a walk outside for 5 minutes, or spending like a little time reading something that kind of like lit me up, helped a lot, as well as just leaning into other people around me, whether that was like, professional, counselors or mental health folks, or just shining people in my life that really showed up, and really kind of making those connections are two things in my own life that, I think have certainly helped navigate those times. And also, I think quieting, like we have a tendency to beat ourselves up, like, oh, I wish I was more productive, or why can't I get over this? And when we can kind of just sit with ourselves and, quiet some of that, new paths show up that weren't there before. And, so that's something I think that's helpful as well, whether it's, through different modalities like meditation or yoga, or, just even gentle stretching or whatever, like really feels good to you and your body in those times, um, can be like a gateway forward, I think.
And you mentioned in the beginning that you had a big paradigm shift, like you were in your previous job and role, and then you are in a completely different journey now. And I'm curious to hear from you how that rewiring happened and how that helped you get to be where you are. You talked about your friends passing and the beautiful poems. I see a lot of times people, again, going back to the situation and saying that feeling stuck at some stage and they do not move, they do not come out of it, they do not take that step to make a change. And you mentioned something beautiful that, taking those little things, little signs, and then working towards what you want to be. And I want to hear from you as you how you did that magic to yourself, and how would you suggest someone who's feeling that darkness or feeling stuck, then how do they start their journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all have these shining things inside of us, and that really kind of getting quiet and just following the path of what makes us curious and what makes us feel joyful can be a lovely step. And sometimes we think about our dreams as something so far off in the distance, but I just think like taking little baby steps toward them. And even if you have no idea like how that's going to play out or what that's going to look like, I think sometimes our logical mind isn't our friend in this process, right? That our logical mind sort of like wants to know what the end goal is. And we just have to kind of be like, God bless you, but like just stay over there for a minute and let me just, follow the heart in this process. And that, maybe your family or your friends are just rolling their eyes at you the whole time and you have no idea what's going to come of it, but just really, leaning into what makes you feel joyful. Or, if you don't know what that is, maybe sometimes looking back at what you did in childhood and what you really like love to do at childhood and reconnecting with some of those things without judgment, and just meeting yourself right where you are with them as a creative exercise can be really, really beautiful, and kind of letting that logical mind just, sit over there for a minute while you explore.
And when you started working with people and building this community, and you started becoming the writer as well, right? So from an educator to this writing journey, and uh, how did the creativity inspired into your the newfound profession? How do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like one of the things that I did early on was I listed out what are the things in my life that I really kind of value and that make me feel good. And so for me, it was like whole foods, eating whole foods, getting outside every day, doing some kind of um, like meditation or yoga, and reading and writing every day. And I just tried to then incorporate those things into my week. I had like a little grid on my planner actually, and I would check off early on in my business when I made time for those things. And I think it helped me just open up with clarity and discernment how to, incorporate those things into my days and into my schedule, and has helped me just to take little steps in that direction where the path appeared in terms of finding clients that were in alignment, and then being able to start doing more of my own writing. But it just really started with getting clear on sort of what I loved and what I valued, I think.
And you work with a lot of people, right? And uh, I mean, not within like stepping into someone's privacy, of course, but what is your perception, or what do you come across that is troubling people, that people are feeling challenged in some areas? Do you want to share any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I work with clients that are really holistic and spiritual wellness entrepreneurs, but I think that their challenges probably are not that different than the challenges that most anyone working in any career faces. That sometimes they, are overtaxed with just the amount of workload that they have, and my team and I help with that. Sometimes people just need, a thought partner and someone to brainstorm and bounce ideas off with. And so that's a way that I show up for my clients as well. And just kind of helping them be able to map the way forward.
And you mentioned the wellness and spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
and how do they come hand in hand in your community?
So, I mean, I think that, and I know I keep like talking about, our culture just not giving us like a great roadmap for these things, but that really those things fit together in a lot of ways. And sometimes we're just so busy, like on a hamster wheel of going, 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 that, we let our health kind of take a back seat. And so I think I lost the thread of your question. Can you say
Sorry,
it one more time?
that's all right. No, you mentioned that when you work with people and you work with their spiritual awareness as well.
Mhm.
So, in relation to healing, in relation to feeling better, or even starting that process of the whole wellness journey, where does spirituality fit in? And what you work with how you work with people who in that space. I'm just curious to hear, because in today's world, the understanding of spirituality at some times I feel very divided, and and I read something very beautiful in a book this year. It was on mindfulness, and someone was explaining very ancient Buddhist philosophies in very simple terms. And one of them, which really really resonated with me, is that whenever you are going through challenges, difficulties, don't get sucked into that moment. Instead, stay neutral and think of this as an experiment. So whether something good is happening or something bad is happening, think of that as an experiment that you're observing, and observe and make notes and see what comes out of it. But do not get sucked into that feeling. And that was really great. I mean, I felt that, yeah, and most of the times where I've struggled is because I got sucked into that moment. And this realization was very spiritual for me. So this is a like stepping stone to mindfulness, that um, we know something wrong is happening, but not letting that affect me. Those darkness, those feelings will always be there. And instead of fighting hard, or, you know, running away from it, if we just recognize it is there, it's an experiment. Okay, this is uh, uh, as you can say that in today's world, it's a bad data, but that data is there. It's not a good data, but it is there. It is an experiment. So I felt that in terms of spirituality, that was a very interesting concept, and probably it has been said thousands of years ago. but how we interpret and adapt that in our lives today can make a big difference. And you mentioned in your community, you work with nature, with our connection with nature, and you help people heal and grow. In your spectrum, where does spirituality fit in, and what do you feel about that?
I think I love what you said just a minute ago too about it being an experiment. And I think for me, I love looking at it through looking at life or looking through hard times just through the lens of the observer, right? Our logical mind wants to jump in and like fix everything and diagnose it and make it better. But if we can just sort of observe what's going on in a non-judgmental way, I think it ties into exactly what you were saying a moment ago, that just gives us a more, gentle lens for ourselves.
Our logical mind sometimes can be very hard on us, that this is not perfect, this is not happening, and you have to make everything picture perfect, and do things in certain way, and that creates that emotional weight on us. So that is where I was kind of coming from. So, and as a, I want to go back to your writing. So you have, you mentioned that your books came out and you found a publisher. I've seen all your posts on, about sharing the book. And how do you see yourself in coming years? That what are you working on? Can you tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely intend to write more books. I'm working on actually another book that's about rest as a tool for personal and cultural transformation right now, with the goal of having that out in quarter 1 of next year. And that's something that I think like comes back to your theme of failure as well, that sometimes if we're not living out our heart's truth, no amount of like massages and spa days and naps is going to help that, right? I've lived that out in my own experience, that like no amount of like rest and relaxation was going to fix the fact that I wasn't doing what I really felt called to do. And so the book sort of ends with, how can we follow that breadcrumb trail, and how can we like take the steps to what makes us feel joyful and curious, not knowing where it leads, and just see that as a portal into this next, more generous, more shining version of ourselves.
That is amazing. I wish your book all the success. From your point of view, is there anything that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question a minute ago very well about like this, your questions on spirituality and my clients. So I'm glad to go back to those if it's helpful.
Yeah, please do so. I'm just curious, and we talk about spirituality in different ways, but effectively it's very simple, and living at a higher plane than we would otherwise be if we are dragged into day-to-day things. That is what my spirituality is, elevating myself to somewhere where I can look at everything with kindness and gentleness, and that I often experiment. So, and I was curious to hear from you, because you work with people, and what is it that you practice, if you want to talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that for me, like a big part of my spiritual belief system is nature, because when I look at nature or when I go outside, I just feel like a channel right through me, whether that comes through me in words or, ideas with my business as well. And for other people, I think that, maybe it's not nature, but it's like something else that opens that up, but that can be a really beautiful thing. And that when we can sort of get quiet in those ways, we're able to operate with a different kind of discernment and clarity that's not really present or not as apparent as it is in our logical minds. And so certainly I think the clients that I serve, so I just as a frame of reference, I didn't know anything at all about business before I started my business, because I always thought that business was unethical and was really icky, and I just saw it as like this thing that I wanted nothing to do with. And so when I sort of first started my business and I figured out that I could craft it in a way that's really working to support people that are trying to build a different pathway forward for our culture, and a more spiritual pathway and a more healthful pathway, and a way forward that our culture just doesn't give us a roadmap for, I was blown away and I was stunned. And that's the only business owners that I work with, is people whose work that I really believe in and that I believe is charting a different path forward for us. And so I love working with folks in that world, because I just think it's crucially important that in this time in our history and our culture, people are, really sick and they're not well. And, there's just so much that they need support with. And so that's where I want to spend my time, is helping entrepreneurs that are, showing folks a different pathway forward.
That is wonderful. And if someone who has listened to this interview wants to work with you, do you want to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website. It's just my name, Rhonda, RHONDA, Lynn, LI, like ice cream, NN.com, that has my offerings, and would love to connect.
Thank you so much. And I will put your website, your bio, and the link to your book in the episode description for our listeners who have joined us today. They can refer to the links if they want to. And thank you, Rhonda, for taking the time to talk to Stories and Stanza today and share your amazing community, your writing, and your experience with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This was lovely.
Thank you.